Right, something different for Campbell's comments today. Firstly, Lachlan Ford from IRT is joining me. Hello, Loch.
Hello, mate. How are you?
Very, very well. And I'm going to say thank you, for showing me around. We're at First Point, but IRT offices as well. There's been a fair bit going on today, but this is an amazing setup, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's world class. It was designed when there was a change in the legislation in Australia where they basically said that you needed a first point of entry for animals or any biosecurity matter that came into the country. And obviously with horses being as big as they are and as raucous as they are, we had a few challenges with the airport, but we settled on this site. And this site was created for basically clearing horses in and out of the country.
We're going to go into in-depth in it in a little bit. I have been fortunate enough to bring 2 horses in, but they were a long time ago and it has changed so much. Do you ever look back at it and say, wow, how did we do it that way?
You do. And you actually, you look at it and you say how recent it was. Like we're talking 5-6 years ago, we were still loading horses out on the tarmac next to the aircraft. So things have changed a lot and for the better, from a welfare point of view for the horses, it's so much better. The legislation change came with a few nightmares and a few sleepless nights, but at the same time, it probably aided industry in being able to set a standard like this.
I actually was here, Peter Huntington. We did a chat because of Romantic Warrior and organising the feed through KER, and we were friends with Barristock, who obviously support me as well. But there's so much more that goes actually into it. You guys were almost the facilitators, and when I say you guys, this is IRT, we're almost the facilitators in trying to organise or get the wheels moving to get a feed for a Romantic Warrior that is one of the favourites for the Cox Plate coming up very, very shortly to get to the country. Because if he didn't eat the feed, he wasn't going to start and he wasn't going to be here. So it's a huge role you guys actually play.
Yeah, it is. It's. I actually had a laugh with someone yesterday saying that the horses is the easy bit. Once you include feed, equipment and gear and people, that's where the hard stuff comes. And the feed's a really interesting one because Australia's got really strict biosecurity standards with feed in terms of the processing of those feeds. So often you'll find a runner wants to come into the country with a certain type of feed. It may be a feed that's not processed or cooked enough to a level that meets the Australian standards. Therefore, we have to get an import permit to irradiate the feed, for instance, which is what we had to do with Romantic Warrior. Why we also had the conversation with Pete at the time, and I know the Jockey Club reached out to him to create something that was a like for like with natural feed here and products here. But yeah, it's a complete nightmare. The feed is. We understand the horses need it and we understand that they want to stay on their product, but it is a huge part of our job which comes with moving horses for international racing, yeah.
You've got a flight coming over very shortly. We'll land Saturday. Saturday and Saturday night here in Melbourne. Peter was alluding to there before, it's one name I won't forget, Jimi Hendrix. What a great name. I mean, no one's going to forget it. He's a racehorse, but he is one horse. But he was saying like the different feed companies can be funny to deal with.
Yep.
But others can be very, very easy and very, very accommodating. And Jimi Hendrix, basically, they gave him all the rationals and he's gone through and designed a feed, and that horse will arrive in Sydney with a feed that he couldn't bring in from Europe, but he's going to have a pretty close like-for-like feed when he arrives in Sydney, to partake in some huge racing for the racing economy.
Yeah, he is, and Pete's a fascinating guy. He's IRT's had a long association with Pete and KER, and he's always been our go-to expert for feed, and he actually designs our feed that we use for horses that come in from Europe or overseas at our quarantine facility to make sure. Because there's 2 different types of horses we move. There's the runners that are usually in work, hot feed. They need to be up and running and active very quickly. And then we have our general traffic horses that might be horses that have been bought for, might be stallions, or they might be runners that are going to run in 6 months' time. They need a lot cooler feed, and we've got to make sure that we don't heat the horses up too much so that they carry on like pork chops out of quarantine. Pete helps a lot with that in terms of designing those feeds. But in terms of like-for-like feeds, you can pretty much give a feed to Pete and say, hey, this is what we need to replicate, and he will, within 99.9%, be able to replicate the feed that is being used overseas.
We could say on Pete for a while, but I encourage people to go and watch the interview I did with him because it is really, really cool. Well, we will start feed for one sec. How often, like on a plane, how often do you feed them? Do you guys guide the people through feeding them. And one other thing I did notice, and I want to make sure this is correct, but you give the horses hay and it helps with their eardrops popping, because anyone that's flown as a human, so that is true?
Yeah, it is to a degree, yeah. It is. There's a few different things for the feed. So feeding for a general traffic horse, we won't feed the horse in flight. So we will basically give them access to hay, and good quality hay, so that it's getting through the horse without too many problems. In terms of general feeding, we don't in flight because of issues potentially with colic on arrival or colic in air, which is huge problems if that happens. So runners would tend to have a light feed, so that would literally be a couple of handfuls of feed maybe every 8 hours or so, but keeping it minimal because you don't want too much in the guts, again, for risk of colic and those sort of things. Because horses in air are naturally under pressure. They're feeling a bit tense, they're feeling a bit nervous. That's when the onset of colic and things can happen. So for us, we tend to steer away from feed at all on the flights. But you're right, one of the benefits of hay nets is the munching of the ears, and it does keep their ears nice and clear.
That was Aldebaran Zeus, and we will, at the end of it, we will touch on the two standardbreds because they both had their flights, but we'll talk about those. So the European horses are coming out as we speak. I'll give the brother a little bit of a rap. He's one of the grooms going to be bringing those horses back. Now, there's horses for the Sydney Carnival and Melbourne Cup. That in itself's changed because this time of year, the flight would only be coming to Melbourne. There wouldn't have been too many horses dropping off at Sydney, but now with the Sydney Carnival, so that must automatically give you guys a little bit of a logistic nightmare.
Yeah, it is. It's and you're dealing with two jurisdictions that really don't want to deal with each other. So you try.
Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah, no. Funny enough, they don't get on that well. So we're completely independent, but they do have to coordinate with each other a little bit because, for instance, if we use the example of the runners coming in for the Spring Carnival, so they use a facility that we lease each carnival called Side Hill, which is owned by Juddmonte, which is a facility that has about 18 stalls. Great facility, has access to the gallops. During the quarantine, we actually have to shut the gallops down in the afternoon, so literally have people marshalling the gallops to make sure that the horses are kept in isolation so the horses can be kept in work. We now have to run the one facility for both Melbourne and Sydney, so the horses are both training there at the same time. We've now coordinated a flight that used to just come to Melbourne that now stops in Sydney and Melbourne. So your runners get off in Sydney and then your runners get off in Melbourne. So from a logistics point of view, it's definitely become more complicated, but it's just another piece in the puzzle.
They wouldn't stay on the tarmac very long in Sydney. I would imagine you try to get them here as quick as you can. Would that be fair?
Yeah, an hour. I think the scheduled time is an hour and a half. So they touch down, land, literally take off the 5 stalls they're getting off in Sydney. Plane comes down here.
Does the plane only have horses on it, or is there other cargo and other passengers on it, or is it just purely a horsebound flight?
No, it's a cargo plane, so there's no passengers other than the crew on the plane. The freight can be anything, mate. It could be pharmaceutical products coming in. It could be airline equipment. Australia is quite a big importer of goods, whereas our export market is a lot less. So the planes coming in are usually fairly full.
I remember actually, it's funny what I was saying that because I remember Grant was saying one time they had 2 very expensive cars that were actually on pallets, and the word was, do not breathe on them because they got alarmed. So I do remember that. I don't think they come to Australia. I think they stayed off in the Middle East there somewhere, but that was one of the ones I remembered. When they land here, and this is a part that has changed, and I would imagine it's changed. Do you have a similar facility to this in Sydney?
No.
So is Sydney still the old style?
It's been redesigned by Sydney Airports, so it's managed and operated by Sydney Airports, or it's actually operated by Swissport, the freight handler. But it's an open-air facility rather than an enclosed facility like here.
Yeah, so the old one, anyone remember that was around the back, basically where the passengers got on the plane. It was just around the back of there, and you've got the old ramp around the side that got all the horses off, and it did work. I mean, I don't know any bad stories, and we don't want to bring any of those, but it did work. This facility, though, is state of the art, starting from basically they come into like a land airlocked, you said, but it is open air, but it is an airlocked area, and get unloaded, which for me just seems so safe for everything from the rollers to get the horses out here and get them into the right spot to the beautiful ramp you have going down for the horses to be able to disembark.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, really. And it is world class. It's probably one of the best facilities in the world. When we first designed this facility, it wasn't about being a stabling unit on airport or an animal hotel that they have around Europe and those sort of places. It was purely designed to safely offload and transit horses onto trucks to get them to quarantine, or vice versa to get them to the plane. Yep. So the whole idea of this facility was to create a really good flow for both the horses, the stalls and the people that are involved. So what we've designed here is really about keeping it nice and safe. You can see all the rubber that's down here.
It's so soft.
It's so soft. So you can have a horse scrambling off its head, and you can have a foal and a mare next to it, and they don't even poke. Would not bat an eyelid because they just don't panic around this area. And being inside here, Melbourne weather, you can have 5 seasons in a day, even though there's only 4. Melbourne somehow seems to throw up a few extras. It basically it keeps all of that out of it. So from a horse point of view, you're in a very, very controlled environment, which for us is perfect. And it has changed the way that we load horses and the way we unload horses. And it means that their journey is shorter too, because you can do it in a quicker time.
Which is great for everyone. Confidence for people from Europe bringing horses here, get onto the standardbreds and horses travelling from there to go there to start off here.
Yep.
And know that they're 90% chance they'll be on that in their box and on their flight, or out of their box and heading off to their destination. A couple of the logistical things that I'd never thought about for starters, cleaning out the boxes and the waste and things along the lines that people just don't think about. I suppose everyone picks up poo. Anyone that's watching this has picked up poo at some point in time. But that in itself is a little bit of a minefield. That you have stuff come from New Zealand, doesn't have to be the same as the stuff coming with this Melbourne Cup horses and things like that. It must be a lot easier with this facility than what it once was, but I suppose it also probably gets a little bit harder with the quarantine rules.
It does, the quarantine rules. And look, the quarantine rules are there for a reason, and that is Australia is an island, and we want to protect our borders from, both horse exotic diseases, but also diseases that might come from biological waste, and that's horse shit, and stuff that might come in with the horses from overseas. So it is a logistical nightmare working through those types of things, but it's a pretty simple process. You have flights that come in here that come from New Zealand. They are considered a like for like with Australia, and as long as we have very clear manufacturer declarations on the way the shavings were produced, that waste the stalls do have to be cleaned, but that waste can just go into general waste. Yep. Whereas when you're bringing in a horse from, say, America, Europe, into Australia, they're considered a higher risk biological concern. So therefore, those stalls have to be cleaned out the same way, but their waste has to go into quarantine bins. Those quarantine bins are then either deep buried or sent off for incineration, and it can only be handled by 2 or 3 contractors here in Melbourne. So it's a higher cost, and it's also just a logistical bit of mayhem.
I was going to say, it's a hidden cost that a lot of people wouldn't think about.
Yeah, it is. And there's so many things on international movements in terms of costs that, you just wouldn't think about it. We think of international movement, we think of jumping on a passenger plane. Yeah. The most you might have to do is do a visa. These things, you've got to worry about the horse waste, you've got to worry about the feed waste, you've got to worry about the customs entries, you've got to worry about the Department of Agriculture, you've got to do, over on that side, you've got to do a health certificate, you've got stud book transfers, and that's before you even move the horse. These are just things that are costs that build into the international movement of a horse. So there's a lot to consider when you look at the end-to-end product and service that we offer, and that's IRT does it really well, and I think we do it really well in having a network of offices around the world, because you're shipping to each other. So you've got a very good affinity with empathy with what they're having to deal with, and vice versa. They know what we're having to deal with here, and it allows you to actually create a really nice flow on being able to send the horses in and out.
Biosecurity, anyone would have seen any of those biosecurity things. Some of us get upset. I know I do. Every time I fly to New Zealand, I've got to open my bags about 10 times over because I say I've got cameras, and then that's it. You've got to open them. But it would be a similar thing here with the horses if it wasn't regulated properly and done the right way as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the rules are there in place, and the rules aren't just specific to Australia. Every country has a set of rules. So if you're sending horses from one of our large clients is the Hong Kong Jockey Club. So if we're sending horses to Hong Kong, they will set out a rule book that we have to follow, and that is that the horses do a 21-day quarantine before they go. They have to be equine influenza vaccinated. They have to be tested for X, Y, Z blood test before they go. So every country has those rules. So it's not unique to Australia, but I guess the thing that Australia is so conscious about is our agricultural industry and protecting our borders. And so we have a really good working relationship with the department in terms of being able to meet those requirements and also just being able to protect the industry here.
And the other part is with grooms. I said there before about Grant, and you gave me a little bit of a run through on how it works. We don't actually necessarily have to go into that, but I mean, they're moving horses. Horses get put on a truck and they leave, and you sort of think that that's it. But the grooms and anyone that comes in here and handles horses in any way, when we're here at First Point, they have to go through this amazing shower system, and it must feel a little bit like a jail, I reckon, for the guys, especially the first couple of times. I imagine after a while they get used to it, but this shower system and that would have took a little bit of working out, I would imagine, but again, from Department of Health's point of view, they must be wrapped with how it all works.
Yeah, well, one of when this was first created, and it's been one of the touch points for import protocols for a number of years, and I think it really got highlighted post EI because people started to think, okay, well, how does the disease move, and who are the carriers of that disease? And one of the things that was identified was horse waste and people.
Yeah.
And people went, oh, right, okay, so when a person lands, we can't just let them go out the gate because they could be covered in EI or a horse disease and then go to their stable or wherever. So it was a real focus point, and it's changed the way that imports happen now. So you talk about your Grant and the grooms that come in. So anyone who touches the horses here, if it's an international arrival, they have to go and have a 3-minute shower. So they work through our maze of shower systems, and they literally get locked in the shower for 3 minutes. Yeah. And that's the protocol and the standard for saying that someone can be disinfected and cleaned. And then they put on new clothes. Their old clothes or their dirty clothes, as they call them, would be laundered, and their clean clothes are on the other side where they get into. And that's all that's just breaking down those layers of potential spread of disease. And unfortunately for the grooms, that's part of the process. But you're right in saying that some people freak out. I know when we bring international grooms in here and they might dispatch from here, they find it really confronting being stuck in the shower for 3 minutes, because 3 minutes is a really long time. Yeah. You know, when you're on a clock, 3 minutes in a shower is a really long time. So we've had a few people freak out in there, and we do have emergency buttons that they can press if they freak out too much.
We must say it's not as barbaric as a jail. I mean, you get a change room, then walk into a shower, but you can't go back into where you got changed. You have to walk out the other day, and everything is locked. That the next person waiting cannot get in there until the first person has actually left the place. The doors all lock, and then that process and the clothes are gone. It starts a process up. So it is like that. We don't want anyone to be thinking they are in a jail and there's blokes with guns or anything like that. It is just a little bit different, but it is cool insight. One of the other things, and as I said, it was Romantic Warrior was a horse that triggered me through just listening to the radio and 927, and I must say it was just an awesome interview saying about the feed and all the rest. But also with the harness horses, just recently Aldebaran Zeus flew to America, which is not a common flight for horses. Well, it is a common flight, but not for horses to actually go over there and race. Completely. And more differently again was Just Believe, and going all the way to Sweden. What was it, 22 hours, 21 hours or something along those lines. Do you enjoy the challenges of something, I suppose, a little bit differently? And how much work goes in behind the scenes trying to logistically organise the travel for all those trips?
A truckload of work, in short. I personally, I love that sort of stuff. You know, I like to think that IRT is a business where we facilitate people's dreams and people's desires to do things that might be really different, and when you get presented with something like that, you go, oh geez, how are we going to do this? And then you have to work through, you basically would grab a piece of paper and write down a list of things that cross your mind, and when you go into places like Europe, every European country, you need different little health certificates, and you need customs entries, and you need to worry about, okay, well, how are they not going to be whacked with tax here if we move it this way? And then is there a way of going in on a bond, or can they go in on a carnet, or how do we do that? We've got to speak to the business authorities down here on how that possibly can happen. So for us, they're really, really good challenges, really cool challenges, but they come with a lot of pressure because expectations are that, oh, I tell you, you'll fix this. They'll be fine. They'll be able to work this out. And nearly every time we do, but it does come with a lot of pressure.
And that's the thing. You can sit there and watch a presentation of any horse, and they say, "Oh, we're going to go take on the world. We're going to go back and take on the Ark and things along those lines." Do you ever sit there and watch, and you go, "Geez, have you got everything in order before you just come to us?" Or do you watch an interview like, so someone says that they're going to go, take on the Ark, or go to America? If you get wind of it, do you touch base with them and just say, "How you travelling?"
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So I actively keep an interest in and an eye on everything that's happened from both thoroughbred and standardbred market in terms of things that are happening and discussions that are taking place. And we actively will say, especially you can see peak times during the year, and thoroughbreds is a classic example where you see the sprinters start running, in autumn, and you go, okay, well, the Ascot discussion is going to come up soon, so you as soon as you start seeing the Ascot discussion, you'll just touch base with the trainers and say, hey, just letting you know, there's a few things that you need to do if you want to keep this potential dream alive, and usually that's vaccinating and a few simple things that they can do in between their racing. So we do keep an eye on that and stay in touch with people.
And then the flip side, do you watch Just Believe and Aldebaran Zeus? Do you watch them race? Like I imagine, I know both actually was terrific on social media, both Duncan and also Lara J Farms. Greg was quite funny on a few of the ones that he actually put on there. Do you find yourself following their trip, and then I suppose watching the results of their race and sort of get a bit of a smirk?
Absolutely, and the wonderful thing is when you see horses perform well and expectations are what we as Australians would like our horses or New Zealanders to do on the global scale. When you see them perform really well, you do have a sense of pride in being involved in it, but it gives you a belief that our product's good enough, and we do have a really good product here in Australia. And we've got some standardbred tragics in our office. We've got a lot of guys who just follow the standardbreds, and they actually don't even know what thoroughbreds are. They're so one-eyed standardbred, and they're just constantly showing us videos of horses winning all over the place.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. It is great. And as I said, this is First Point, and I would say in New Zealand, I'm going to be in trouble with you guys from NZB Air Freight, is it as well? They come into here. So this area here, come into here. You guys have the offices here and you oversee it, but it is pretty much any any international horse plane. When I say international, of course, New Zealand are international. They all come through this now state-of-the-art facilities. One thing I do know, and I asked you this before, you've shipped the most horses out of a singular airport here in the Southern Hemisphere, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
60 horses, is that right?
60. We've done more than that, actually. Yeah, we've done more. We've done a few shipments to South Africa of that size. Went back in the would have been 2005 through to 2010. There was a huge demand for Australian horses in South Africa. We used to send plane loads of them, so 60 horses at a time, and your brother was a groom on one of those flights where you'd do double drops, because you'd drop some into Johannesburg and then you'd send some into Cape Town. For different reasons. Usually it was where their stables were set up and it was what quarantine they wanted to land in. So they're always difficult jobs. But we have done some shipments where you send 81 on a plane.
81?
Yeah. So there's actually, the way a freight plane is designed is it's basically a passenger plane with nothing in it. All it's got is a tracking system that allows for stalls or PMCs to move in and out for freight to move in and off the plane. And there's 27 of those positions that can be used for horses. And so if you're filling up a plane, you can fill it up with 81. And some of those shipments have been, movements to China. I think the New Zealand office might have a record. I reckon they sent maybe 130 horses on a plane. And you'll say, how can that happen? Because there's only 27 positions. They send a heap of minis. And so they had these crates designed that could double deck. And that's how the cattle move around if they go via air freight. So I don't know what the exact number was, but it was definitely over 100, and they hold the record, I think.
That's awesome. I was just picturing all these little miniatures on there. But and that's the thing. And we're talking here about the Spring Carnival and high-priced standardbreds. They're going to stand back at stud. But every horse gets treated equally. Those minis come off here or wherever they actually are, and that is the cool part. It doesn't, if it's $1 horse or $100 horse, it makes no difference how they're treated when they land here. People look after them in the same way. Every horse is treated the same. Every groom is treated the same. Just on the grooms, the guys coming with the international horses, they don't shower down here. If anyone's wondering, they shower down at Werribee because they actually stay with the horses. They get on that truck and travel with those, whereas Grant, my brother, they go to the quarantine centre, the horses do, and the grooms don't come off here. That's how it sort of does work, just if anyone is watching.
Correct, yeah. So basically there's anyone who comes in from an international point of view has to shower out somewhere, and they have to be under control. So the grooms would shower out, the IRT employed grooms, like Grant, would shower out here at First Point and then jump in their car and off go home. The grooms that come in, so they might be stable grooms, so it might be Aidan O'Brien, who might have some guys on the plane, or Joseph O'Brien out of Ireland, or James Ferguson out of the UK. He would have his grooms coming in with the plane. Those guys would then be placed onto the truck with the horses. They'd go down to Werribee, for instance, and then shower out of Werribee.
And then Werribee's a whole different beast as well. And I would imagine that probably creates a little bit of an issue too with language barriers and things along those lines. I could talk to you forever. I was just thinking about that then. If you got the odd groom that didn't speak English, and I know there's a few that struggle with the English, and telling them to get on the plane, they're like, no, a truck, I don't want to get on the truck. So you could have a lot of fun. Lachie, thank you. Well done for what you guys are doing, and safe travel and things along those lines, but like a little silent achiever. And as I said, basically, I've got to give a shout out to Andrew Soper, another guy who was a groom, who does work for, now back works for KER, because he actually facilitated Peter Huntington. Peter got me here. He's been able to get me this. So I do, one, appreciate it, really appreciate it, the insight, and hopefully it opens up a few eyes for people. But it is, something very, very integral, and we want people to take their horses and take on the world, and have facilities like this to be a starting point, and also a coming home point as well. It's pretty cool. So thank you, well done, keep up what you guys are doing. I think it's awesome, and hopefully I can come back here one day. Hopefully we'll get a Melbourne Cup winner out of here this time or something like that. Your locals mightn't like it, but thank you very much.
Thank you, thanks for your time.